Hey, what's up guys, it's DarkArmedDuelist, and today we're going to be doing a Satellarknight deck profile. So I'm really excited for this one because this deck is absolutely insane. Being able to summon out some really good Xyz monsters, and if you love Xyz, this deck is the deck for you because pretty much that's all you're playing in the entire extra deck. And summoning out one of the coolest Xyz monsters ever created that can just immediately put everything back into the hand except for itself in the form of Satellarknight Travers. So without further ado guys, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell there so you can become part of the notification squad, and definitely check out the Patreon down in the description below because we have some awesome rewards you guys, like getting your name description for every single video, getting a signed card sent in the mail, or even getting to request a deck profile every single month that you're a patron along with test hands. So without further ado, let's get straight on into this. So first off, we're going to be playing 3 copies of Satellarknight Deneb. So Satellarknight Deneb is probably one of the best cards in the entire deck, with the effect that when she is summoned, you get to add 1 Tellarknight monster from your deck to your hand, except another copy of herself. This deck is very simplistic in what it tries to do and is really good at what it does, which is being simple. If I was going to recommend a deck for somebody that's just starting out to learn Yu-Gi-Oh, this would probably be the deck. We then play 3 copies of Satellarknight Altair. Every time Altair is summoned, when this card is summoned, you get to target a Tellarknight monster in your graveyard and special summon that monster in face-up defense position, but monsters you control cannot attack for the rest of the turn except Tellarknights. We then play 3 copies of Anukalai. Anukalai is pretty good in this deck too. It's basically a Foolish Burial that when it's summoned, you get to send a Tellarknight card from your deck to the graveyard, which is pretty good just to help you get your monsters in the graveyard as quickly as possible. We then play 3 copies of Satellarknight Vega. Vega is really good too because when this card is summoned, you can summon a Tellarknight monster from your hand, which then will then trigger one of the other 3, which is pretty good. And that's why it's so simplistic, is because that's the only Tellarknight monsters that you're playing in the entire deck. You're only playing 4 different monsters. If you can remember 4 monsters effects, you can play this deck. We then play 3 copies of Ash Blossom. Ash Blossom is really good in the deck too because you need Ash Blossom as kind of like a hand trap to stop your opponent from searching the deck and just initially stopping the first play that they're going to throw out at you. And then we play 2 copies of Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. Now you can play Nibiru in this position. I like 2 copies of Ghost Ogre instead. You could play 3 if you wanted to play 3 Ghost Ogre. It's totally up to you. I like 2 in this particular build because it just stops stuff like Dragon Link. It stops stuff like Infernoble Knights. There's just so many decks that this card is good against that you could even flip it and play 2 Ash and 3 Ghost Ogre. It just depends on what you want to play for hand traps. I think 5 is the optimal number for the monsters because I play a couple of other cards in the deck to stop other card effects. So that's it for the monsters, guys. Very simplistic in what they do. Basically, search, special summon from grave, Foolish Burial, and a special summon from hand is all they do. And then the hand traps do whatever they need to do, which is destroy a card that's activated on the field and basically stop a search, which is very simplistic in what this deck does. I mean, it's a really fun deck, but it's very easy. We then play, for the spells, we're playing a bunch of spells and even more traps. We're playing a single copy of Monster Reborn. Monster Reborn just helps you get your Tellarknight monsters out of the graveyard, and if they're summoned, their effects trigger, so this card's really good. 1 copy of Reinforcements of the Army because they're all warrior monsters. 1 copy of Satellarknight Skybridge. Skybridge is really good because it has the ability to let you target a Tellarknight monster you control, and then you special summon 1 Tellarknight monster with a different name from your deck, and if you do, you shuffle the targeted monster on the field back into the deck. And then while that special summon monster is face up on the field, you cannot special summon monsters except Tellarknight monsters, which is good and bad. It helps you tag out your Tellarknight monsters to get other monsters on your side of the field. And then for the last spell, we're playing a single copy of Double or Nothing. You're just playing 4 spells in this deck. It's all you really need. I've bumped the spells down quite a lot because the traps are really where it's at in this deck. Basically, your Double or Nothing helps you OTK your opponent and go after them with a 10,000 beat stick in the form of Utopia Double, which is the way to actually like OTK your opponent, because it's really nice to be able to just summon a 10k beat stick and then swing for game. So that's it for the spells, guys. Again, very simple. Special summon from grave, search, OTK, and then tag in and out your Tellarknights. So let's go ahead and get into the traps. The traps is where we play the majority of the cards in this entire deck. So first off, we're opening up with 3 Infinite Impermanence. This is why I only play the 5 hand traps, because you play 3 more here for a total of 8 hand traps so far. What this card does is it lets you basically negate a monster your opponent controls effects, and if you don't control any cards and your opponent pushes you to go first, you can negate a card on the field, but with this card in your hand, you can just immediately drop it on the first turn, which is really good. We play 2 copies of Anti-Spell Fragrance, makes it to your opponent, and you have to set your spell cards during the turn that you're going to activate them. They have to be set a turn before you activate them, which is pretty good because it just makes all the spells into traps, essentially, which is really nice to slow down the game so Tellarknights can bounce cards back with your Tellarknight Trevere. We then play 2 copies of Solemn Strike. Solemn Strike could be 2 Nibiru's if you wanted it to be. I like the Strike in here because it just stops your opponent from summoning monsters. It can help you hit pivotal choke points that your opponent's going to be playing against you. 3 copies of Solemn Judgment. It says no to everything, which is why this card is so good in this deck, and it's just a ridiculously good 3 of. You basically pay half your life points and say no to whatever cards you don't want to deal with. And why it's such a good card is because there's a lot of cards in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh right now that you just need to say no to, and this card is really good at doing that. We then play 3 copies of Satellar Nova Alpha. Nova Alpha is really, really insane. It's probably one of the best counter traps in the entire game. That when a spell or trap card or monster effect is activated, you get to send one face-up Tellarknight monster you control to the graveyard and negate the activation of that card, and if you destroy that card, and then you draw a card to really help you out to dig into the deck and replace and kind of regain some of those cards that you got rid of. It is a -1, but it is stopping a card, so it is still really good to be able to stop any card that you need, because you're basically playing 8 counter traps, so you really want to go first in this deck. We then play 3 copies of Call by the Grave, because anytime your Tellarknight monsters are summoned, you're going to trigger their effects. And also with Trevere's effect is going to activate to be able to spin your copy of Call by the Grave back to your hand to be able to use it again, which is really cool. So if you have a copy of Vega and a copy of Altair, or just a copy of Altair and a copy of your Call of the Haunted in your hand, then you can activate the copy of Call of the Haunted to be able to bring back a copy of one of your Tellarknights, like Vega, or not Vega, but Deneb, which is always the one you want to search. Then it searches a copy of your copy of Altair, normal summon the Altair will trigger, and then put another Tellarknight on your side of the field, and then you can overlay all 3 of those on your side of the field to go into a copy of Trevere to be able to bounce this back to your hand, and then use it again once you set it, which is really good. Which is why continuous traps are so good in this deck, is because Trevere can shuffle them back into your hand. We then play 3 copies of Crackdown. Crackdown lets you take an opponent's monster, and it kind of is a good disruption because you activate this card by targeting face-up monster your opponent controls, take control of that monster, and then while you control that monster, it cannot attack or activate its effects. So it's a really good disruption to just take your opponent's monster off their side of the field, and they can't activate its effects, and it can't attack, which is just really good because you can use it as a XZ material, and it just helps you out overall to be able to get rid of problematic cards on your opponent's side of the field. So that's it for the main deck, guys. Let's get into the extra deck. So for the extra deck, we are going to be playing 3 copies, and I totally cannot emphasize this enough. You need 3 copies of Trevere. Trevere is the main card that you're going to be going for in this deck, and it is ridiculously good because it has the ability that during your turn, you can XZ summon this card. You cannot, during the turn you XZ summon this card, you cannot special summon monsters except for Tellarknight monsters, which is not that big of a deal. And the monsters, if this card is XZ summoned, you return all monsters your opponent controls on the field to the hand. And then once per turn, you can detach a material from this card, and then you send a random card from your opponent's hand to the graveyard. And you can only use this effect once per turn. And if this card is XZ summon card is sent to the graveyard, you can target a Tellarknight monster in your graveyard and special summon it back, which can be your Altair, which then can revive another one, or it can be Deneb to search Altair that you can then normal summon Deneb the next turn, or Altair the next turn to revive your Deneb to get another search if your opponent takes out the copy of Deneb that this card revived, which is really good. We then play a single copy of Deltaros. Deltaros is pretty good too because if this card is XZ summon, your opponent cannot activate cards or effects when you normal or special summon one of your monsters. And then once per turn, you detach a material from this card to target a card your opponent controls and destroy it. And if this card is sent to the graveyard, then you can special summon 1 Tellarknight monster in your hand or deck. To be able to special summon any of your Tellarknight monsters from deck is ridiculous, but the only downside to both of these is they require 3 XZ materials to summon them, but we have a fix for that in the form of Dark Tellarknight, the Dark Tellarknight. What this card does is insanely good, and it's just a really good card to summon in deck, especially with Construct being on the front of it. Originally when I saw the art of this, I thought it was going to be a Shaddoll, but it being this is kind of weird. But what this card does is it has the ability that you can basically all face a monster on the field become dark, and then you detach a material from this card to special summon 1 monster from your extra deck that's a light Tellarknight monster by using this card as a material for the XZ summon. So for instance, if you only have 2 Tellarknight monsters, like your Altair becomes a 1 card this, and then you discard a card, and then you summon your copy of Altair, or you summon your copy of Trevere or Deltaros off your copy of the Dark Tellarknight, which is really, really good. We play a single copy of Constellar Diamond. This card basically eats dark monsters, which is really cool because it just detaches the material from it to negate the activation of a dark monster and destroy it, which is really good. We play a single copy of AA Zeus because we play everything we play in the extra deck is a Xyz monster. So this card's really good just to stop your, to blow board and just deal with your opponent's field. We play 2 copies of Utopia, which is a single copy of Utopia and 1 copy of Utopia Double. And that is a single copy of Utopia and then Utopia Double. Because what this card does is basically you make it, and then you search your copy of Utopia Double by detaching a material. You overlay your Utopia on top of it, and then you swing at your opponent for 5,000, detach your material, drop double or nothing, and OTK your opponent with a 10,000 beat stick. For the other cards that we're playing in the deck, we're playing a single copy of Baguska just to kind of slow down the game just in case you need to. 1 copy of Tornado Dragon just to pop spells and traps. Exciton Knight to blow boards, Abyss Dweller because it can shut down the graveyard, and a single copy of number 60 because it can double the attack of a monster, which is super helpful in this deck just to be able to double the attack of a monster, or draw 2 and discard 1 can help you set up to get you additional cards to set on your side of the field that are traps, because this deck is a very control-based deck that basically says no to your opponent over and over again. That's why this deck is really easy to play around with and why it's super fun, because you only have to memorize 4 monsters that are in the main deck's effects besides your hand traps, and then basically if you know how to summon Altair, or not Altair, but Trevere, you're totally fine. So anyways, guys, that's it for this deck. I hope you don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and definitely hit that bell in there so you can become part of the notification squad. And tell me what you think of this deck down in the comments down below, because it's a very simplistic deck that if you know somebody that's trying to get into Yu-Gi-Oh, or you're trying to get into Yu-Gi-Oh yourself, this is probably the deck for you, because it just stops so many cards and basically lets you say no to everything, and you're not really going to mess up with it to stop a certain card in the deck, because as long as you're stopping cards, you're winning in this deck, which is pretty cool, and it's really simplistic. So anyways, guys, this is DarkArmedDuelist. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell there so you can become part of the notification squad, and definitely check out the Patreon down in the description below, and we'll see you guys in the next video. See you later, guys.